Flames clawed at a dawn sky, devouring a settler's dream. Amidst the slaughter, a Comanche warrior, his face a mask of war, did the unthinkable. He emerged from the inferno, not with plunder, but with a crying infant clutched to his chest, his eyes burning with defiance against his own war party. Why would a man drenched in the violence of a raid, a warrior sworn to his people, betray everything to save this single, enemy child? This is the story of that burning homestead, and the warrior who made an impossible choice. The Miller homestead was a small island of stubborn hope in the vast, unforgiving ocean of the prairie. Amos Miller, a man whose quiet strength was etched into the lines around his eyes and the set of his jaw, moved through his days with a determined rhythm. His calloused hands, accustomed to the bite of the axe and the pull of the plow, were surprisingly gentle when they smoothed the flaxen hair of his infant daughter, Rose, or rested on the shoulder of his wife, Martha. Martha, her spirit a resilient prairie flower, made their small, rough-hewn cabin a sanctuary against the wildness that pressed in from all sides. The creak of the porch swing, the smell of baking bread, the low murmur of their voices in the evening, these were the fragile threads of their existence. They knew the whispers that drifted on the wind, tales of unrest among the tribes, of raids and retribution. The vast emptiness that surrounded them offered little promise of aid should trouble find their door. Amos had recently bartered a good portion of their meager savings for a newer, more reliable rifle, its blued steel a cold comfort he'd check each night. He'd also begun deepening the root cellar, his digging punctuated by muttered phrases about a safe place, just in case. Martha would watch him, a familiar ache of love and fear tightening her chest. She'd hum lullabies to Rose, her voice a little too bright, trying to banish the shadows that flickered at the edges of their hard-won peace. Many miles distant, within the shifting heart of his Comanche band's territory, a warrior named Nakona carried a different kind of unease. His face, often unreadable, hid a growing disquiet. He was a man who observed more than he spoke, his gaze missing little. He watched Tarak, the war chief, a man whose words were like sparks, capable of igniting either warmth or a devastating wildfire. Lately, Tarak's pronouncements had been nothing but wildfire. He spoke of a sacred duty to reclaim every inch of land, to answer every perceived slight with overwhelming force. Tarak painted the settlers not as misguided people, but as a creeping pestilence, a stain to be cleansed with blood. He spoke of a past humiliation, a treaty broken years ago near a place called Willow Creek, where his own kin had been scattered, a wound Tarak seemed determined to inflict tenfold upon any who now crossed his path. Nakona remembered the elders of his youth, men who spoke of balance, of cunning, of survival that sometimes meant bending like the willow rather than breaking like the oak. Tarak spoke only of breaking others. Nakona felt the ancient loyalty to his people, a bond as strong as sinew. Yet Tarak's path felt like a dark, bottomless canyon from which there could be no return. He saw the younger warriors, their eyes reflecting the inferno of Tarak's rhetoric, their hands eager on their weapons. A cold dread settled in Nakona's stomach, a premonition of sorrow yet to come. This was not the way of honor. This was the path to desolation for all. His gaze would often drift to the horizon, a silent question in his eyes. The drums began a low, guttural pulse that vibrated through the very earth, calling the warriors. Tarak stood before them, his powerful frame radiating an almost palpable fury. His voice, when he spoke, was not merely a call to arms, but an incantation of vengeance. He told them the spirits of the ancestors cried out, their sacred lands desecrated, the buffalo, their lifeblood, slaughtered for sport by the newcomers. He spoke of the settlers' fences as ropes around the neck of the people, their plows as knives in the heart of the earth. His eyes, like chips of obsidian, swept across the assembled men, igniting a dangerous fervor. He declared that patience was a luxury they could no longer afford, that the time for talking was past, the time for action, for making the invaders tremble at their name, was now. Nakona listened, his expression carefully neutral, but inside, a storm raged. He saw Turok's finger stab at a crude map drawn in the dust, marking a spot near a winding, cottonwood-lined creek. The Miller homestead. Turok announced this would be the first lesson, a message written in fire and blood, a warning that would echo across the plains. No one would be spared. The smoke from their burning home would be their testament. Nakona's blood ran cold. He knew that homestead. He'd seen it from a distance on hunts, a small, unassuming place. A family. His gaze flickered to Mocha, Turok's most zealous lieutenant, a warrior whose cruelty was legend. Mocha's lips were drawn back in a predatory grin, his hand already caressing the scarred handle of his war axe. The decision, Nakona knew, was immutable. The target was chosen. The die was cast in blood. A sense of grim inevitability settled over Nakona, yet beneath it, a spark of rebellion, small and desperate, began to glow. As the moon cast long, skeletal shadows, the war party moved. They were a river of silent, deadly intent flowing across the land, dust rising like ghostly plumes in their wake. Nakona rode towards the rear, a position that allowed him to observe, to think, though his thoughts brought little comfort. The words of his grandfather echoed in his mind, a respected elder who had taught that true courage was not in the indiscriminate taking of life, but in the wisdom to know when restraint was the greater strength. Those words felt like whispers from a forgotten age, drowned out by the simmering rage that propelled the warriors forward. As they neared the valley where the Miller homestead lay nestled, Nakona urged his pony forward, drawing alongside Turok. He kept his voice low, measured, attempting to navigate the treacherous currents of the war chief's mood. He suggested that the homestead was isolated, its occupants of little threat, their livestock, their tools. These could be taken. A clear message of Comanche strength delivered without resorting to utter annihilation. Perhaps, he ventured, leaving them alive, stripped of their possessions, but with their lives, would spread fear more effectively than silent ashes. Turok turned his head slowly, his eyes fixing Nakona with a gaze as cold and sharp as a winter wind. A sneer twisted Turok's lips. He accused Nakona of having a soft heart, of forgetting the countless betrayals their people had endured. He spoke of the settlers as a disease, and one did not show mercy to a disease. One eradicated it. Turok spat contemptuously onto the parched earth, declaring that the only language these invaders understood was that of total destruction. He then spurred his horse ahead, leaving Nakona enveloped in a cloud of dust and the chilling certainty of what was to come. He saw Mocha and a few of Turok's other favored warriors glance back at him, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and contempt. His attempt at counsel had only served to isolate him further. His gaze swept over the sleeping valley, his mind, honed by years of tracking and warfare, automatically cataloging the lay of the land, the gentle slope towards the creek, the stand of trees that offered cover, the vulnerable points of the small cabin. But his assessment was not for attack. A heavy weariness settled upon him, the weariness of a man forced to participate in an act that violated his deepest sense of honor. The lance in his hand felt less like a weapon of a warrior and more like the tool of an executioner. The pre-dawn stillness was shattered by a sound designed to freeze the blood, the ululating war cry of the Comanche. It was followed by the percussive thunder of hooves, a sound that promised imminent destruction. Amos Miller, already stirring with the first light, tending to a newborn calf in the small lean-to beside the barn, straightened abruptly. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He yelled for Martha, his voice cracking with urgency, telling her to get Rose, to get to the cellar. But the storm was already upon them. Warriors, their faces painted in grotesque masks of fury, materialized from the gloom like vengeful spirits. Amos fumbled for his rifle, his hand slick with sudden sweat. He fired once, the shot echoing flatly in the vastness. Then again, his aim hurried, desperate to slow the tide. He saw one painted pony stumble, its rider pitching forward, but the others came on, a relentless, terrifying wave. Martha, her face a mask of pale terror, but her movements quick, slammed the cabin door shut, and dropped the heavy wooden bar, her other arm protectively cradling the now screaming Rose. The thin wood of the door shuddered under the impact of shoulders and axe butts. Amos, outside, became a whirlwind of desperate courage. He fought not with tactics, but with the raw fury of a man defending his home, his family. When his rifle was empty, he wielded it as a club, his roars of defiance swallowed by the chorus of war cries. But he was one man, and they were many. He felt a searing pain in his leg, then another in his shoulder. He staggered, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw was the leering, triumphant face of Mocha, an axe descending in a glittering arc inside the cabin. Martha's scream was a blade of sound, sharp with ultimate despair. Then flames, like hungry orange tongues, began to lick at the dry timbers of the cabin. Smoke, thick and acrid, billowed, quickly filling the small space. Tarak, mounted on his prancing, painted warhorse, surveyed the scene, his expression one of grim, terrible satisfaction. He raised his arm, his voice cutting through the chaos, ordering his men to burn everything, to leave no trace but ashes and fear. His warriors, drunk on violence, obeyed with brutal efficiency. The air became a choking miasma of burning wood, the metallic tang of gunpowder, and the sickeningly sweet scent of spilled blood. Nakona had held back, positioned on a slight rise, a silent, unwilling witness. The knot in his stomach tightened with each fresh horror. He saw Tarak's warriors moving with a terrible, methodical purpose, their actions devoid of any hesitation, any flicker of mercy. This was not battle. This was a culling. The screams from within the burning cabin had ceased, replaced now only by the hungry roar of the consuming fire. And then, cutting through the cacophony of destruction, the crackle of the inferno, the triumphant shouts of the warriors, the terrified neighing of horses, Nakona heard it. A sound so utterly incongruous, so fragile and piercing in the heart of such savagery, it seemed to stop his own heart. A baby's cry. Thin, choked with smoke, terrified, but undeniably the cry of an infant. It emanated from the core of the blazing cabin. His head snapped towards the structure, now a raging pyre against the paling dawn. He saw Mocha and another warrior, their faces illuminated by the flames they carried, moving towards the only remaining doorway, their intent sickeningly clear. In that single, stark moment, the years of gnawing unease, the silent questioning of Tarak's relentless brutality, the remembered wisdom of his grandfather about true strength, all converged. It was not a conscious decision, but an eruption from the deepest well of his being. Something within Nakona, long suppressed, finally broke free. It was as if the spirits of his honorable ancestors themselves cried out in protest against this final, unforgivable desecration of life. He let out a sharp, guttural cry, not a war whoop, but a sound of raw, uncontainable anguish and defiance. Before Tarak could react, before any of the other warriors could fully comprehend the sudden shift in the scene, Nakona drove his heels into his pony's flanks. He charged not away from the chaos, but directly towards its fiery center. He didn't slow as he reached the collapsing cabin, but leaped from his pony's back even as it shied from the searing heat. He plunged through the burning, splintered remnants of the doorway, ignoring the wave of superheated air that seared his lungs, his eyes, accustomed to smoke and darkness, frantically scanning the blazing interior. There, in a small, crudely fashioned wooden cradle, miraculously shielded, for a few moments by a fallen section of wall, but now surrounded by a curtain of flame and falling embers, lay baby Rose. Her tiny face was crimson, streaked with soot, her cries now faint, desperate gasps. With a swift, urgent movement, Nakona scooped her up. Her small, warm, trembling body was a shocking contrast to the roaring inferno and the cold purpose of the warriors outside. He spun, clutching her protectively against his chest, and burst back out into the smoky dawn, just as the main roof beam of the cabin groaned and collapsed inwards with a deafening crash, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris high into the air. He stood there for a heart-stopping moment, silhouetted against the conflagration, his chest heaving, blinking against the sudden brightness, the wailing infant in his arms. He faced the utterly dumbfounded, then rapidly enraged, figures of Turok and his warriors. The baby's cry, though weak, seemed to echo in the sudden, stunned silence, a tiny pinprick of innocence in a world consumed by hate. Turok's face, which moments before had been alight with the grim satisfaction of victory, underwent a chilling transformation. Disbelief warred with incandescent rage, twisting his features into a demonic mask. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, venomous growl, each word dripping with menace. He demanded to know the meaning of Nakona's actions, calling the child a thing that was meant to die with the others, ordering Nakona to hand her over. He gestured with an impatient, violent flick of his wrist, his eyes like burning coals. Mocha, his initial shock giving way to snarling fury, along with several other warriors, began to advance, their weapons glinting menacingly, their expressions promising swift and brutal retribution. Nakona did not flinch. He stood his ground, the intense heat of the burning homestead at his back, the fragile, precious weight of the child in his arms a sudden, unshakable anchor to his soul. He met Turok's murderous gaze, and for the first time in his life, there was no trace of deference in his eyes, only a cold, hard, unyielding resolve. His voice, when he answered, was surprisingly steady, cutting through the charged atmosphere like a knife. "No," he said. "This one lives." A collective gasp, a ripple of shock and disbelief, ran through the assembled warriors. Some exchanged uncertain glances, their eyes flicking between Turok's consuming fury and Nakona's quiet, almost regal defiance. Turok's hand tightened on the hilt of his knife, the knuckles showing white. He accused Nakona of daring to defy him, of betraying his own people for the spawn of their enemies, calling him a traitor who would die alongside the child. Nakona's voice rose then, imbued with a passion that surprised even himself. If protecting an innocent child from this senseless, honorless slaughter was the act of a traitor, then he would wear that name. But he would not stand by and watch the true honor of the Comanche people be reduced to ashes alongside this homestead. This, he declared, his gaze sweeping over the warriors, was not the way of true warriors. It was the way of butchers, of cowards who found courage only in overwhelming numbers against the helpless. Turok let out a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated fury, a sound more animal than human. He screamed the order to kill Nakona, to kill them both. Mocha, needing no further encouragement, lunged, his war axe whistling through the air. Nakona, moving with a sudden, desperate agility that seemed impossible while cradling an infant, sidestepped the deadly arc. He used the shaft of his still-held lance to deflect the axe, the impact jarring his arm. He knew he couldn't fight his way through all of them, not while shielding the baby. His only hope, slim as it was, lay in escape. He spun, lashing out with a powerful kick that sent another advancing warrior sprawling, then bolted towards his pony, which stood trembling nearby, its eyes wide with the surrounding chaos. With a surge of adrenaline, he vaulted into the saddle, the baby held securely against his chest, and wheeled the animal, not towards the open plains, but towards the broken, rock-strewn terrain of the nearby foothills, the only path that offered even a sliver of a chance. Arrows hissed past his head, thudding into the ground where he'd been moments before. Shouts of rage, Turok's loudest among them, echoed behind him. The pursuit began immediately, a relentless wave of vengeance. Turok, his face a mask of infernal rage, drove his warriors hard, determined to bring down the man who had so publicly shamed him. For what felt like an eternity, Nakona rode, pushing his hardy pony to the very brink of its endurance. He used every ounce of his ingrained knowledge of the land, every hidden game trail, every rocky outcrop, every dense thicket, to try and shake his pursuers. He doubled back on his own trail, rode through shallow creek beds to obscure his tracks, and scaled steep, treacherous ridges that would have deterred less desperate men. The baby, Rose, had, by some miracle, quieted in his arms. Perhaps she sensed the desperate urgency of their flight, or perhaps sheer exhaustion had finally claimed her. Each time Nakona dared to hope he had gained some precious distance, he would hear the faint, chilling shouts of the pursuing warriors carried on the wind, or catch a fleeting glimpse of Turok's riders cresting a distant rise. He knew Turok's pride, coupled with his fury, would not allow him to give up this chase easily. This was no longer just about a disobedient warrior. This was a profound challenge to Turok's authority, a deep stain on his war chief's honor that, in Turok's mind, could only be cleansed with Nakona's blood. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, Nakona, his horse lathered and stumbling with exhaustion, his own body aching with a weariness that went bone deep, spotted it, a narrow, almost invisible slash in the earth, the entrance to a hidden canyon. It was a gamble. Canyons could be traps, dead ends. But his options were dwindling with each passing moment. With a silent prayer to whatever spirits might still listen to a man like him, he guided his faltering horse into the shadowy defile. For a breathless moment, the sounds of pursuit seemed to fade. Then he heard Turok's voice, chillingly close, booming at the canyon mouth. Turok was certain Nakona was in there, ordering his warriors to spread out, boasting that he could not hide for long. Nakona pressed on, the rock walls closing in around him, offering both concealment and confinement. He found a small alcove, screened from the main passage by a recent rockfall. He carefully dismounted, his movement stiff, and gently placed the sleeping baby into a sheltered crevice, covering her with his own worn, buckskin shirt for warmth. He had to make a stand here, or at least buy enough time for the deep darkness of night to offer a better chance of escape. He drew his knife, its familiar weight a small comfort, and took up his lance, its tip stained with the grime of their desperate flight. He didn't have to wait long. He heard the telltale skitter of dislodged stones nearby. Mocha, his face contorted in a predatory sneer, appeared at the narrow entrance to Nakona's makeshift sanctuary. He taunted Nakona, telling him there was nowhere left to run, calling him traitor. Nakona offered no reply, his eyes like chips of ice, his entire being focused on the imminent threat. Mocha charged, his axe raised. The fight was a brutal, desperate affair, confined by the unyielding rock walls. Nakona, fueled by a potent combination of righteous fury and the primal need to protect the innocent life hidden nearby, fought with the lethal skill of a warrior who had seen countless battles, and the savage tenacity of a man who had already sacrificed everything. He moved with a fluid grace, parrying, dodging, striking. He managed to disarm Mocha, his lance trapping the axe, and then, with a swift, disabling blow to the man's temple, sent him crumpling to the ground, unconscious but alive. But the respite was momentary. Turok himself then appeared, blocking the only exit, his face a mask of pure, murderous intent. He accused Nakona of choosing dishonor, of spitting on the graves of their ancestors. He lunged, his own knife a blur of motion. Their battle was a whirlwind of flashing steel, grunts of effort, and the harsh scrape of moccasins on rock. Turok was immensely powerful, his attacks fueled by a boundless rage, but Nakona was agile, his movements economical and precise, his purpose a cold, clear flame within him. The fight seemed to stretch for an age, every feint, every parry, every strike a matter of life or death. Finally, with a desperate, twisting maneuver that left him exposed for a fraction of a second, Nakona managed to deflect Turok's blade and, in the same motion, lock his arm, forcing the war chief's knife to clatter harmlessly onto the stony ground. Turok stood panting, disarmed, defeated, his eyes still burning with an impotent, all-consuming fury. He spat at Nakona's feet, daring him to finish it, to kill him like the traitor he believed Nakona to be. Nakona looked at the man who had been his leader, the man who had led his people down this dark path. He saw not a mighty war chief, but a man consumed by his own hatred. He told Turok that his path, his reign of terror, ended here, not by Nakona's hand in an act of vengeance, for that would make him no better, but by the inevitable consequences of Turok's own destructive choices, which would surely find him in time. With those words, Nakona turned his back on the stunned and seething Turok. He retrieved the stirring baby from her hiding place, her small whimper a stark counterpoint to the violence that had just transpired. Then, without a backward glance, he pushed past the defeated war chief and disappeared deeper into the labyrinthine canyon, just as the first stars began to emerge, cold and distant, in the rapidly darkening sky. He knew other warriors were still out there, combing the area, but Turok's will, the driving force of the pursuit, had been broken, at least for this night. Nakona journeyed for 2 more suns and 3 more nights, a ghost moving through a hostile land. He traveled mostly under the cloak of darkness, his senses stretched taut, every shadow a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a possible enemy. The baby, whom he had silently named Little Sparrow for the faint, sweet sound she made when she wasn't crying, was incredibly resilient, though visibly weakened by their ordeal. He shared his dwindling supply of water, giving her the lion's share, and was fortunate enough to trade a few spare arrowheads for a small pouch of goat's milk from a reclusive, half-mad mountain trapper he'd encountered once before, a man who lived by his own rules and asked no questions, offering only a piece of tough, dried meat and silent companionship before Nakona moved on. He knew, with a certainty that ached in his chest, that he could not keep her. He was an outcast now, a man with a price on his head among his own people, and a target for any settlers or soldiers who might cross his path. Little Sparrow's only hope for survival, for a life beyond constant flight and fear, lay with her own kind, far from the reach of Turok's inevitable retribution and the brutal, unforgiving realities of the ongoing frontier wars. He remembered from long ago scouting missions, hearing whispers of a small, isolated mission, run by a quiet order of devout women, situated several days' journey to the south, in territory that was considered, if not entirely peaceful, then at least less fiercely contested. It was a slim chance, a desperate hope, but it was the only one he could offer her. The journey was an exercise in endurance and stealth. He skirted settlements, his heart pounding whenever he saw the distant glow of campfires. He avoided patrols of blue-coated soldiers, melting into the landscape like a shadow. He constantly watched his back trail, sleeping in short, fitful bursts, always with one ear open. Little Sparrow was his constant, silent companion, her small, warm presence in the sling he'd fashioned a strange, unexpected comfort, a tangible reminder of the profound choice he had made, a choice that had redefined his existence. Finally, weary to the point of collapse, his clothes torn, his body gaunt, he saw it, the simple, sun-baked adobe walls of the mission, a plain wooden cross stark against the vast, empty sky. It looked like a haven of peace in a war-torn world. Under the velvet cloak of a moonless night, he approached the mission, his moccasins making no sound on the dry earth. He gently, tenderly, wrapped Little Sparrow in the last remaining clean piece of cloth he possessed, a piece of an old trade blanket. Alongside her, he placed a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a little meadowlark, a token he had painstakingly crafted during lonely night watches many seasons ago, a small piece of himself. He laid her carefully in a sturdy woven basket he'd found abandoned near a dry creek bed earlier that day, and placed the basket on the worn stone steps leading to the mission's main door. His heart felt as if it were being squeezed in a vice, a profound ache of sorrow mixed with a dawning, fragile relief. He took one last, long look at her peaceful, sleeping face, then straightened. He knocked loudly, firmly, on the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Then, before anyone could respond, he melted back into the deepest shadows at the edge of the mission compound, his eyes fixed on the door. After a few moments, a faint light appeared behind a shuttered window. The door creaked open, and a woman, her face framed by a simple coif, holding a flickering lantern aloft, peered out into the darkness. Her gaze fell upon the basket. A small gasp escaped her lips. She moved forward cautiously, Then her eyes widened as she saw the tiny occupant. She lifted little Sparrow with gentle, practiced hands, her expression softening with an immediate, profound compassion as the baby let out a soft, sleepy whimper. Nakona watched until the woman had carried little Sparrow safely inside, until the door was closed, and the warm light was extinguished. Only then did he turn. He walked away, a solitary, enigmatic figure disappearing into the vast, silent, indifferent darkness of the prairie. He was a warrior without a tribe, a protector without a charge, an outcast by his own choosing. His old life, his old identity, had been consumed by the flames of the Miller homestead as surely and irrevocably as the cabin itself. But as he walked, a new, quiet, and unshakable strength began to fill the empty spaces within him. He had faced the deepest darkness, not only in the actions of his people, but within the conflicting loyalties of his own heart, and he had chosen a different path, a path towards a nascent, fragile light. He did not know what the future held for him, what trials or tribulations lay ahead on his solitary journey, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would walk his new path with the quiet dignity and unyielding honor that had been reborn in him amidst fire and sacrifice. Back in the Comanche encampment, whispers of Nakona's unprecedented defiance and Tarak's subsequent humiliation spread like wildfire. Some of the older warriors, and even a few of the younger ones who had felt uneasy with Tarak's escalating brutality, began to murmur that Tarak's medicine was now bad, that his senseless cruelty had offended the spirits and would bring misfortune upon the people. Tarak's once unquestioned authority, built on fear and aggression, began to show cracks, to fracture from within. The baby, Rose Miller, would grow up within the compassionate embrace of the mission, the incredible story of her miraculous rescue by a mysterious, unnamed Comanche warrior becoming a cherished local legend, a whispered testament to an unexpected, astonishing act of courage and mercy in an age largely defined by its unrelenting hardness. And Nakona, the warrior who saved one baby from the inferno, would forever roam the dusty trails and hidden canyons of the West, a silent guardian, his name unknown to those he might protect, his own legend whispered only by the wind and remembered by the stars. The West was indeed a brutal, unforgiving land, but this story served as a reminder that sometimes, even in its darkest, most violent corners, a single, defiant act of conscience could ignite a beacon of hope, a hard-won peace found not in the clamor of victory, but in the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit.